everyone, and welcome to Mysteries of Science again. My name's Dan and I'm the editor of Science and Nature, which is the monthly magazine from the team behind The Week Junior.
And I'm Stevie, the deputy editor. On this podcast, we explore the strange phenomena and bizarre events that have left scientists scratching their heads. Today, we have a special episode to celebrate International Day of Women and Girls in Science, which falls on 11th of February. This day aims to champion women in science and encourage more girls to get involved in STEM subjects.
Fantastic, Stevie. I have got a big mystery for you today. Something that's always left me scratching my head. I was just wondering, have you ever looked closely at a map of the world and seen that the continents, well, they just look as if they fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle? Why would that be?
Yes, you're right, they do. And the way the Earth's landmasses are arranged is a long-standing mystery, and one that was only resolved thanks to the work of one of the 20th century's greatest map makers, Marie Tharp.
We're going to tell the story of all of Marie Tharp's incredible discoveries, including some mysterious mountains of the deep.
Ooh, this is Mysteries of Science.
So, Stevie, tell the listeners, tell me, who was Marie Tharp?
Well, some of you may have heard about her back in November 2022 when she appeared in a Google Doodle.
I do remember that one, yeah. It was the 21st of November 2022, I think. And if you would like to see it for yourself, it's really cool. You can go to google.com/doodles and they're all there to have a look at.
Yeah. Well, we've got one of the people behind that doodle to talk to us about who Marie Tharp was.
Hi, I'm Becky, and I am a geologist and science communicator.
Becky runs a YouTube channel about geology called GeoBeck.
Welcome to Mysteries of Science, Becky. I'd love to know what made you want to go into geology, how you found your way there.
So I actually grew up spending a lot of time outside. Luckily, my family brought me hiking and skiing and camping. I grew up in upstate New York, so there's a lot of really beautiful outdoor spaces here that I'm lucky to live near, like the Catskill Mountains and the Adirondack Mountains, and the Hudson River. And I just grew up in the outdoor space, and I just always was curious about how things formed and how they got there. I always loved collecting rocks and everything, but it wasn't until college that I realized geology was something I could actually study and make a career out of. I actually kind of happened upon it by accident. I was looking for majors to switch to because I was undecided my first year of college, and it was coming to the time where you have to pick something. And so I was like, I don't know what I want. And I was just looking at a list of all of the options, and I saw geology, and I was like, wow, I didn't even know they had that at this school. So I looked into it, I took the first class, and then I was hooked right away on the first class and just went from there.
Brilliant. And where did the idea to do the YouTube channel come from?
I'm really passionate about making people realize that a scientist can look like so many different things. You can be interested in many different things. It doesn't have to fit a certain mold. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room or super nerdy, because these are all things I kind of had the misconception about. When I started studying science, I almost didn't study science because I thought that there were certain things you had to be, and I just thought I wasn't smart enough. So my mission is to make people realize that you can do a lot more than you think you can.
Someone else who was made to feel like they didn't belong in science was Marie Tharp. As Becky explains, she wasn't even allowed to go on expeditions because people at the time thought women brought bad luck at sea.
Marie Tharp was she was a geologist and a cartographer who mapped the ocean floors by hand with pen and ink. And this was in the 40s and 50s. And she was pretty young when she started this career. It was really rare at the time for a woman to be in the geosciences. And she got a job at this laboratory where they were working on the ocean floors, mapping the ocean floors and trying to figure out what it looks like down there. Because before this, it was kind of just thought that the ocean floors were just this big flat plain of mud. And there were some scientists earlier in like the 1900s, like Alfred Wegener, who kind of like thought of the idea that maybe the continents are drifting apart, and this is called continental drift. But he couldn't prove it. He had the idea, but there was no way for him to say like, hey, this is why this is true. So Marie Tharp came along and she started working at this place, and her colleagues were all men who went out to sea, and they actually collected the data because she wasn't allowed on the research vessels because she was a woman, and it was actually considered bad luck for women to be on board, so she wasn't allowed. So they brought back the data, and she did the tedious work of mapping it with pen and ink. And she pretty much found that there was this rift running across the ocean floor where the two oceanic plates are spreading apart. And she was able to take that idea and say, hey, this is actually happening.
Okay, so there's quite a lot to unpack here. There's this guy, a German scientist called Alfred Wegener, and he thought that the continents could move?
Yes, and he thought that this theory, continental drift, could explain how Earth's large landmasses looked like they were once locked together.
But there was no proof.
No, not until Marie and her maps. In the 1950s, she was working with another geologist called Bruce Hazen. They mapped the ocean floor using something called echo sounders.
Ooh, those sound cool. What are they?
Echo sounders, also called sonar, are special detectors that measure the water depth by sending out pings and listening for the returning echo from the solid sea floor.
And so what did Marie and Bruce discover with these echo sounders?
Echo sounders. Echo sounders.
Well, as Becky explains, people used to think that the bottom of the ocean was a flat, featureless, muddy plain. But what Marie discovered was that it was actually full of valleys and deep ravines and soaring undersea mountains.
No way! The mysterious mountains of the deep. And I think Becky mentioned this rift. What was that all about?
So the strangest thing they discovered was a V-shaped cleft running through the middle of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is a long mountain range under the ocean. It looked like a scar or a tear formed from two continents ripping apart. Perhaps this was a missing piece of evidence which could explain Wegener's continental drift theory once and for all.
So, presumably, I imagine, people were absolutely thrilled and delighted that Marie had finally found proof that the continents split apart.
Nope. Her supervisor, Hazen, dismissed it as girl talk.
Sorry, girl talk?
Yep, that's exactly what he said. People felt like the continental drift theory was an old and disproved idea. The explorer, Jacques Cousteau, even chartered a ship to sail into the Atlantic and dive to the bottom of the ocean to prove Marie wrong.
And I love this. Instead of actually proving her wrong, he ended up recording the very first video footage of the Mid-Atlantic Rift.
Yes, of course he did. Okay, so we know, thanks to Marie's maps, that the peaks of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge are actually the world's longest mountain range.
It's time to say hello to our next expert.
I'm Kate Larson. I'm a geologist and geocommunicator. I teach people about geology and geoscience as a whole on social media and through things like podcasts, in-person talks, school appearances, and library presentations.
Hi, Kate. So we would like to know how Marie's discovery explained Wegener's ideas and how big continents made of solid rock split apart.
He had said that the continents were drifting apart, that they were just drifting randomly, and there wasn't really a lot of proponent to it. He didn't really have a lot of proof saying this is why it's happening. And the drift aspect of it didn't really make a lot of sense. So when we learned more about it and, Marie had discovered the mid-ocean ridges, then we started to call this plate tectonics. It wasn't just the continents drifting apart, it was continental plates, pushing up against each other, spreading apart, colliding, sliding past each other. It's so much more than that. It's the way that all of the continental plates that make up the Earth, yes, even underneath the oceans, it's how all those plates interact with each other. And the 7 continents, part of them, are on we have 7 or 8 major tectonic plates, and they kind of coincide with the continents, except for Europe and Asia being on the same Eurasian plate, and then we have an entire plate just for the Pacific Ocean. That's the Pacific plate, but everything else is just, that's what the continents are. But it's more than just the continents, so that's why we call it plate tectonics and not continental drift.
So land masses forming or drifting apart from each other is all just because of these tectonic plates beneath our feet and how they move around and push up against each other.
Yes, and we know all of this thanks to Marie's maps.
Her influence is huge, and I'm honestly surprised that not a lot of people had learned about her. When you get taught geology in college or earth science in high school, you might only hear about Alfred Wegener, who is the guy who originally proposed the idea of continental drift. But it wasn't until Marie Tharp, decades later, looked at his work and looked at the stuff that she was, putting out there. She didn't think that his work made any sense either, but when she started to see some more proof of his theory, it really propelled this idea of continental drift, which evolved into the modernized theory of plate tectonics. So yes, Alfred Wegener's ideas are the original, that was the original idea about, why the continents look the way they do. But it was really Marie's work. Marie was the reason that anybody ever took those ideas seriously. And she's this huge figure. She's the reason that we understand plate tectonics the way that we do today. But she's often overshadowed.
Her work kind of put forth the whole plate tectonic revolution. The theory of plate tectonics was finally widely accepted by the scientific community in the 60s. So it was actually still a little bit later on after her maps were published with her colleagues. But finally, this was an accepted thing in the science community, and geologists were finally, learning it in school and teaching it. And it was also amazing because she was a woman, and it really just kind of opened the door to more women scientists to realize that they can also be scientists and be successful and do work. And she was really strong and dealt with a lot of hard things. So it wasn't easy, but she showed that it was possible.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd love to hear, Becky, what sort of influence Marie was on you. Was she a big influence?
Yes, of course. I feel like any person like me in the geosciences is kind of just influenced by any women geologists, just because a lot of them were like Marie, that were, the earlier women geologists were just kind of, very isolated, and it must have been really isolating, and I have felt like that before in my previous job and in just other circumstances. Being a woman scientist, there definitely are times where it feels very isolating, or you're feeling like you're not being validated by whoever, and it's just really nice to have that, have someone that can inspire you and say, hey, she dealt with a lot worse stuff. She dealt with a lot of things, and she pretty much changed the world. She changed the maps of the globe. So if she can do that, if she can be the reason that history books are rewritten and science books are rewritten, then it really just inspires me, and I'm sure inspires a lot of other people.
And one for you, Kate. I'm sure that our listeners would love to know how they can follow in Marie's footsteps and become geologists themselves.
You definitely want to be someone who's curious and a good problem solver. And you don't have to be those things to start out. Studying geology helps you to strengthen those skills and build them where you might not have them already. But geology is a lot of problem solving, looking at, a situation, and earth formation, and trying to figure out what happened to form that. What could have happened in Earth's history to for this to look like it does today, for it to be in this spot that it is today. It's like being an Earth detective. So if you like mysteries and you like the outdoors, you consider maybe you want to study geology.
Earth detectives, I absolutely love it. And where can people see some of your work, Kate?
Well, I have a website. It's groovygeologist.com. And there you can find all of my social media, the kinds of work that I do, and just kind of see what geocommunication is about, because just as important, we are just as important as somebody who is working in a lab, who is, doing, research and finding these great discoveries. The people who tell others about those discoveries are just as important to the progression of science, because if no one knows about it, how are we going to progress as a society? How are we going to share this information with each other? So the communications aspect to science and to geology and geoscience is very important.
I couldn't agree more, and that's exactly what we try to do in our magazine, Science and Nature, Kate. I mean, I think if half the population are not encouraged to pursue science, then, well, how can we solve the world's biggest problems?
But as well as sharing information with you, our listeners, we want you to share information with us. And some of you have been. We asked you about your favourite female scientist superheroes, and here's what you said.
My favourite scientist is Dr. Lisa White, and she is an American geologist, and I did a poster about her at school.
And I talk about Margaret Hamilton, who's a computer scientist, and she was one of the engineers to help put the Apollo 11 on the moon, which is just a really great thing because it was such an important moment in history. But I still feel like not many people have heard of her.
For my female scientist, I've chosen Marie Curie, who's most famous for her discovery of radium and polonium. In her lifetime, she also hugely contributed to finding a cure for cancer, as well as being the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes. She named polonium after her native country, Poland. She also got a job quite young to fund her sister's poor education. I find her inspirational and amazing for the way she kept persevering and didn't give up even when times got tough for her and her sisters.
I think Jane Goodall is amazing. She's probably the most famous primate scientist in the world. She loves her work and was known to climb trees and even mimic the behaviour of chimps to gain their trust when she lived and worked in Tanzania. She's 88 now and so probably doesn't climb trees quite so much nowadays. She's a champion of animal rights and is founder of the Roots and Shoots program, which brings together kids of all ages to work on environmental issues. And that's why I like Jane Goodall so much.
We loved hearing all your voices, and it's super easy to get in touch with us. Just send us a voice message. Head to funkidslive.com/mysteries and hit the big red button. Your message could be played on a future episode. We can't wait to hear from you.
And don't forget to join us in 2 weeks' time for our next mystery, which marks the release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantum Mania. We'll be going on a journey into the quantum realm and taking on all sorts of quantum weirdness. Until then, stay curious.